containing an attempt to recover and reconstitute the lost origins of the myths and mysteries, types and symbols, religion and language, with Egypt for the mouthpiece, and Africa as the birthplace.
Okay, let's dive in. We are about to go somewhere that I think for a lot of people is going to feel a little bit like walking right off the edge of a known map.
That's a good way to put it.
We're doing a deep dive into what might be the single most controversial, most heated, and frankly misunderstood debate in the history of, well, history itself.
It is. It's certainly a debate that touches on the very foundations of Western civilization. It really challenges not just what we think we know, but how we claim to know it.
Exactly.
It forces you to ask, who wrote the history books? And maybe more importantly, who did they leave out?
Who did they leave out? That's the question.
Yeah.
We're talking about the origins of religious history, specifically the story of Jesus. Now, usually when you approach this topic, you find two very, very entrenched camps.
Right. The usual suspects.
You have the believers. It happened exactly as the Bible says. It's a unique, miraculous event. Then you got the secular historians, the historicism camp, who, they'll say, okay, maybe the water and the wine didn't happen, but there was definitely a guy.
An itinerant preacher, yeah. Walked around Galilee, got in trouble with the Romans, and was executed.
The historical core.
The historical core. But then there's this third option.
Yes. The one that usually gets laughed out of the room.
By both the church and the university, which is fascinating.
Both sides can agree on that, at least.
Right. Mythicism. The idea that the story of Jesus isn't a history that got exaggerated over time, but actually a myth that got historicized.
That it started as an allegory, a spiritual drama, and was later turned into a biography, specifically an Egyptian one.
And that's why we're here today. We found a catalyst for this whole conversation. There's a very popular video by a scholar named Dan McClellan. He's sharp, deals with biblical data on social media, very respected. The video is called Responding to a Bad Argument for Mythicism.
And in this video, McClellan does what, to be fair, most modern biblical scholars do. He completely dismisses the parallels between Jesus and Egyptian deities, especially Horus.
He calls them made up, fringe, outdated. He basically treats the entire idea that Christianity could have Egyptian roots as some kind of, internet conspiracy theory that doesn't deserve any serious academic engagement.
So our mission today is to test that dismissal. And we're not going to be using Reddit threads or memes or conspiracy blogs.
Oh, absolutely not.
We are going to perform a forensic and exhaustive refutation of McClellan's position using what we're calling the triad of heavy-hitting scholarship. And I have the stack right here on the desk, and it's heavy.
It's a formidable stack, for sure. We're talking about the work of Gerald Massey, the 19th century Egyptologist. He wrote this massive 6-volume set, A Book of the Beginnings, The Natural Genesis, and Ancient Egypt, The Light of the World.
6 volumes.
Then there's Walter Williams, author of The Historical Origin of Christianity. And finally, the one who provides all the context, Martin Brunell, the Cornell professor behind the seminal work, Black Athena.
This is not light reading. I mean, we're talking about thousands upon thousands of pages of etymology, archaeology, historiography.
Deep, dense stuff.
And the question we're asking is simple. Is Dan McClellan right? Are these parallels actually made up? Or is he, and the academic consensus he represents, the one who's actually ignoring the evidence?
And I think we need to set the tone here. This is not about attacking anyone's personal faith. This is about genealogy. It's about the genealogy of ideas.
Right, and intellectual history.
Exactly. If McClellan is right, Christianity just sort of appeared as a unique revelation or a unique historical event in first century Judea. But if the sources we're looking at today are right, Christianity is the direct inheritor, the legacy of an African spiritual system that is thousands of years older than the Bible.
That is a profound difference. So let's get into it. Before we even touch the specific myths, the virgin birth, the crucifixion, all of that, we have to address the framework.
We have to.
Because if you don't understand the lens, the worldview that scholars like McClellan are looking through, none of the evidence will make any sense. Why is a smart guy like him so quick, so instinctual in brushing this off?
Why is the default setting for almost all of Western scholarship to just say, nope, nothing to see here when it comes to Egypt?
Yeah.
And that brings us directly to Martin Bernal and his book Black Athena. If you want to understand why Egypt was effectively erased from biblical and classical history, you have to understand something he calls the Aryan model.
The Aryan model. That sounds, well, it sounds ominous. It has some pretty heavy connotations.
It does. It culminates in the 1930s, but Bernal traces its origins back to the 1840s and 50s. He explains that for most of history, up until about the 18th century, European scholars generally accepted what he calls the ancient model.
The ancient model. Okay, what's that?
That was the view held by the ancient Greeks themselves. You're talking about people like Herodotus, the father of history, or Diodorus Siculus. They openly and, proudly acknowledged that Greek civilization, its gods, its philosophy, its religious rituals, came largely from two places, Egypt and Phoenicia.
So the ancient Greeks, the founders of Western thought, were literally saying, hey, just so you know, we got a lot of this from Africa and the Levant.
Essentially, yes, and they saw it as a good thing. Egypt was the gold standard of ancient wisdom. It was the source. But then, in the 19th century, everything changes. The geopolitical world is completely different.
Yeah.
You have the rise of European colonialism, the Atlantic slave trade is a massive economic engine, and crucially, you have the birth of so-called scientific racism in the universities of Germany and Britain.
And so European scholars just couldn't stomach the idea that their pure classical civilization, the very root of their claimed supremacy, was derived from Africans and Semites.
I absolutely could not. It became intellectually and ideologically intolerable. So they needed a new history. They needed a new timeline.
Fabrication.
Bernal argues, yes, a conscious fabrication.
Sure.
They constructed the Aryan model. This model posits that Greek civilization wasn't an import from the south, but was formed by white Indo-European invaders coming from the north, the Aryans.
And they brought their own language, their own superior culture,
which was seen as inherently superior to anything from the degenerate South. And to make this new model work, they had to do something pretty drastic. They had to systematically discredit the ancient Greek historians. They had to start saying things like, well, Herodotus was lying, or the Greeks were just mistaken about their own history.
Wow.
They literally scrubbed the Afro-Asiatic roots right out of the textbooks. Egypt was partitioned off, seen as something separate, alien, oriental, and not part of the grand story of the West.
And this brings us right back to Dan McClellan. So when he sits in front of his camera and says these parallels are bad arguments or they're outdated, he's not just giving his personal opinion.
Not at all. He is channeling, whether he knows it or not, 150 years of this Aryan model. He is the inheritor of that tradition.
He's defending a timeline that was artificially built specifically to exclude Egypt.
Precisely. When he says consensus, he is citing a consensus that was built upon that very exclusion. The academic tradition he belongs to was meticulously designed to sever the link between Judea, Greece, and Egypt. So when mythicists come along and point out that, hey, Jesus looks a lot like Horus, the scholar's knee-jerk reaction is, that's impossible.
Because their whole worldview is predicated on those cultures being separate and distinct.
It has to be. The wall between them must be maintained.
So what does this all mean for us, then, as we go through this? It means when we hear a word like outdated, we need to ask, outdated according to whom and for what purpose?
Yes. Is it outdated because the evidence proved it wrong or because the ideology changed?
Okay, now that we understand the bias, the why behind the denial, let's get into the actual evidence. Let's do the forensic work. Refutation point number 1.
The big one. The virgin birth.
Right. In his video, it said about the 8.06 timestamp, McClellan claims that the idea of Horus being born of a virgin and these specific biographical details matching Jesus, he says they're made up. He suggests mythicists are just fabricating this to make it fit. He's very, very dismissive here.
He is, and this is where we have to open Gerald Massey's Ancient Egypt, the light of the world. Massey was, he was a self-taught genius, a man who was reading the hieroglyphs before the Rosetta Stone had even been fully digested by the academic establishment.
So he wasn't relying on other people's translations. He was going right to the stone walls.
Directly to the source. And when it comes to the virgin birth, he points us specifically to one place, the Temple of Luxor.
I've seen the images of this in the notes, and it's incredible. This temple was built by Amenhotep III. We were talking about 1700 BC.
Let that sink in. 1700 years before the Christian era. That's a millennium and a half before the Gospels were even a thought.
And on the walls of the Holy of Holies in this temple, there are these 4 consecutive scenes engraved in stone. They tell a very specific story.
Massey catalogs them in meticulous detail in his works. Scene 1, It's the Annunciation.
The Annunciation.
You see the god Tot or Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of the gods appearing to the Virgin Queen. Her name is Mutimua, and he is announcing to her that she is going to give birth to a divine son.
Okay, that sounds uncomfortably familiar. An angel or a god acting as a messenger, announcing a divine birth to a virgin. I mean, that's Luke chapter 1.
It is the exact same narrative structure, and it gets more specific. Scene 2 is the conception, but you have to look at the method. It is not sexual, it's immaculate.
How does it happen?
The text and the image show the god Neph, who's the personification of the Holy Spirit or the divine breath causing the conception. He holds the Ankh, the symbol of life, to her mouth. Life is given through breath, through spirit. An immaculate conception.
So we have the Annunciation by a divine messenger and then the Immaculate Conception by the Holy Spirit. What's scene 3?
Scene 3 is the birth. Simple as that. The child is born. And then scene 4 is the adoration.
The wise men.
The equivalent. You see the newborn child receiving gifts and adoration from spirits and kings who are presenting offering gifts to him. So Massey looks at this sequence: Annunciation, Immaculate Conception, birth, adoration, and he calls it the Kamite blueprint.
Kamite, from Kemet, the name for ancient Egypt.
Correct. This was carved in stone nearly 2 millennia before the Gospels were written, so to sit here today and say that this parallel is made up is to just completely ignore the archaeological record. It's not an interpretation, it's right there on the wall.
So if I'm playing devil's advocate, if I'm Dan McClellan, and I say this is made up, what am I missing? What's the disconnect?
The disconnect is that you're looking for a papyrus that says, word for word, Horus was born of a virgin named Mary in the town of Bethlehem. And because you don't find that exact sentence, you dismiss the clear structural and theological identity of the myth. But the theology of the incarnation, the divine birth, it's right there on the wall at Luxor.
And Massey goes even deeper, doesn't he? He gets into the linguistics of the name itself. This is the part that, it really stopped me in my tracks. The Iu-su.
Yes, this is his philological argument.
Yeah.
And it's powerful. In the Egyptian pyramid texts, the coming child, the son, is often referred to as E. The word E means to come, or the coming one.
Yeah.
And the word for son is su.
Sure.
So when you put them together, you get Iu-su or Iu-su, which means the coming son. He's the son of Atum-Ra.
Iu-su.
And Massey argues, and the phonetics are just are striking, that Iu-su is the direct philological root of the name Isus in Greek, which then becomes Jesus in English.
Isus becomes Jesus.
It's a direct linguistic slide. And the character of this Iu-su in the Egyptian text is crucial. He is the ever-coming son. This isn't a one-time event. In the Egyptian mythos, the child Horus is born of the virgin mother Isis, or in this Luxor case, Mut-Emua in the physical realm, but he transforms.
Right, there's a dual nature.
Exactly. At his moment of maturity, which they often timed astronomically, say at age 30, he becomes the son of the Father, Raheh. He is baptized, so to speak, in the light of the Father. So he has this dual nature, earthly child of the Virgin Mother, but spiritual son of the Divine Father.
Which is precisely the Christology of the New Testament, born of Mary, but is the Son of God. Massey also makes this fascinating point about the two mothers. In the Gospels, you always have two Marys, the Virgin and Mary Magdalene. They're always there at the key moments.
They are, and Massey shows this is not a historical detail. It's an astronomical and ritual allegory. In Egypt, you have the two divine sisters, Isis and Nephthys. Isis is the Virgin Mother. Nephthys is her sister, the nurse, sometimes associated with the darker, hidden aspects of death and rebirth.
They're the ones who attend to the body of Osiris.
They attend to the body of Osiris, and they are present at the birth of Horus. They are the two Mert, or, as Massey suggests, the two Marys. The presence of these two women at the crucifixion and at the tomb in the Gospels is not some historical coincidence. It's a ritual necessity based on the much older Egyptian drama.
So when McClellan says the virgin birth parallel is made up, he's ignoring a story carved into the walls of a 3,700-year-old temple that matches the Gospel narrative beat for beat, right down to the name of the child and the presence of the two mothers.
He is ignoring the stone records. He is trapped inside that Aryan model we talked about, the model which says Judea is distinct from Egypt, so he refuses to see the Egyptian template that Judea was clearly built upon.
Okay, let's move to refutation point number 2, the disciples and the ministry. This is around the 8.30 mark in McClellan's video. And again, he claims that the parallel of the 12 disciples is a fabrication. He basically says, show me a list of 12 guys following Horus around.
And this is where you have to understand that we are dealing with astromythology. This is Massey's absolute strong suit, especially in his book, The Natural Genesis. He explains that the 12 are not originally 12 human fishermen walking around in sandals.
It's not a historical entourage.
Not at all. They are the 12 eons, the 12 powers of the zodiac that surround the sun god.
Right. If Jesus is the sun, the light of the world, the Son of God, then the 12 disciples are the constellations or the powers that the sun passes through on its yearly journey.
Exactly. The sun calls his disciples one by one as he moves through the houses of the zodiac. And Massey cites the Egyptian Book of Hades and the ritual, what we now often call the Book of the Dead. In these ancient texts, Horus is repeatedly described as having 12 followers.
Okay, but what are they called? Are they just, the 12?
No, look at their specific titles. They are called the harvesters and the reapers.
The harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few.
Precisely. That is Matthew 9.37. And Massey traces this quote, this concept, directly to the Egyptian harvest in Amenta, the underworld, or the spiritual realm. Horus calls his followers to reap the souls. They are the reapers of the corn, and corn is a symbol for the soul. They're also called the fishers.
The fishers of men.
Yes. There is a specific scene in the ritual where the followers of Horus are casting nets to save souls from the dark waters of the underworld. It is not a literal fishing trip on the Sea of Galilee. It is a soteriological operation. It's about saving souls. The language is identical.
And Massey gets even more granular, looking at specific disciples. Let's talk about John the Baptist.
This is a great one, Anup the Baptizer.
Anup or Anubis?
Yes, Anubis. In the Egyptian zodiac and the seasonal cycle, Anup is the precursor to Horus. He prepares the way. And what is his official title? The Baptizer. He is the embalmer, the one who purifies the body with water to prepare it for its spiritual journey.
And the linguistic link.
Massey links the name Anup to the Greek Ioannis, which becomes John. The functional relationship between Anup and Horus is the perfect archetype for the relationship between John and Jesus. One prepares the way with the baptism of water, the other follows with the baptism of fire and spirit.
It's the same structure. There's also the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount. I always thought, why a mountain? Was it just a convenient hill? It seems so specific.
In mythology, the geography is always symbolic. Massey explains that Horus is often depicted seated on the Mount of Glory, or Mount Baku. It's the eastern mountain where the sun rises. He is surrounded by his cycle of gods, his followers. And it's from this summit that he gives the law, or the mat, the divine order.
So Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is a parallel to Horus on the Mount of Glory.
It's the king taking his rightful throne at the summit of the equinox, at the highest point, and delivering the new law.
Okay, here's where it gets really, really interesting for me. Lazarus. This one, I admit, it felt like a stretch at first, but when you break down the name, it's startling.
It is one of Massey's most compelling linguistic arguments. In the Egyptian myth, the mummy, the dead body that is raised back to life, is Osiris, but the title of Osiris is very often El-Asar. El implies the, or God, and Asar is the Egyptian name for Osiris, so you have El-Asar.
The Osiris.
Yes. Now, in the later Romanized or Grecized endings, you would often add an us to a name. So El-Asar becomes El-Asaris. Just say that out loud.
El-Asaris. Lazarus. It's right there.
It sounds almost exactly like Lazarus. And what happens to him in this story?
He's dead. Mummified, wrapped in cloths, and in a tomb.
And Horus the sun raises him from the dead. He calls him forth from the tomb. The raising of Lazarus in the Gospel of John is a perfect dramatization, a historicization of the raising of the mummy Osiris by his son Horus. It is the core resurrection drama of Egypt, just transplanted to Judea and turned into a miracle story about a guy named Lazarus.
And the location they give, Bethany.
Massey connects that to Beth Anu, Beth meaning house, and Anu referring to Anubis. The house of Anubis, the place of burial and mummification. So the geography, the names, the actions, they all map back perfectly to the Egyptian mythos.
So once again, we're not just talking about vague similarities here. We're talking about specific functional titles. Reapers, fishers, baptizers, and startling linguistic links that predate the New Testament by thousands of years.
And McClellan's argument, again, it relies on the fact that we don't have a papyrus that lists Peter, James, and John sitting next to Horus. But that completely misses the point. We have the archetypes, the zodiacal powers, the harvesters, the baptizers, the raised mummy, that were later humanized and given Hebrew names to become the characters of the Gospels.
All right, everyone should buckle up for this one because section 4 is the big one. The crucifixion. This is around the 4.94 mark in McClellan's video. And he says, quote, "No pre-NT crucify God." He is extremely confident about this point. His logic is, the Romans invented crucifixion as we know it, so how could Horus have been crucified?
This is a classic textbook example of what Walter Williams calls historicization. McClellan is looking for a first-century Roman execution method, a man being physically nailed to wooden beams by Roman soldiers in a 3000 BC Egyptian text. Of course, he's not going to find that. He is missing the entire symbolic meaning of the stauros.
The stauros. Okay, define that for us.
The Greek word used in the New Testament for cross is stauros, but stauros doesn't originally mean a torture device. It just means an upright stake, a pole, or a pillar. In Egypt, the primary symbol of stability, of life, of resurrection was the tat pillar.
The backbone of Osiris.
It is literally called the backbone of Osiris, and it looks like a cross, often with multiple crossbars. Or think about the Ankh, the cross with a loop at the top, the symbol of life. These cross symbols were central to Egyptian religion for thousands of years.
So the cross, as a sacred symbol, existed for millennia before the Romans ever thought to crucify anyone on one.
Absolutely. Massey argues, very forcefully, that the religion of the cross was established in Memphis as the cult of the god Ptah and his son Uamhetep. The tat was the center of the mystery. In the ritual, the tat, which represents the god, is overthrown. This symbolizes death, or the setting sun, or the winter solstice, and then it is ceremonially raised up to symbolize resurrection and the return of life.
There's that image Massey describes that's just so vivid, the Osiris tat.
Yes, it's a figure of the god Osiris, but his body is the tat pillar itself, with his arms extended crosswise. He is the sustainer of the universe. He literally is the structure of the cosmos. So this is the crucified without the cross, or rather, the god as the cross. He isn't suffering on it, he is it. He is the stability that holds up the heavens.
But there is a passion element in the Egyptian story, too, right? It's not just a structural symbol. Osiris does suffer.
He absolutely does. In the myth, Osiris is betrayed by his brother Sut, or Set. He is tricked, he is killed, his body is cut into 14 pieces. He suffers a terrible passion, and there is a crossing. The sun crosses the equinox. This astronomical crossing was symbolized by the cross. Massey argues that the Christian crucifixion is a literalization of this much older mythic crossing. The passion of Osiris, his betrayal, his death, his restoration by Isis, is the spiritual template.
And this is where Walter Williams comes in and really brings this home in the historical origin of Christianity. He talks about how this spiritual allegory was deliberately historicized.
Williams is very blunt about this. He argues that the Roman state and later the Roman church took these profound spiritual dramas, the drama of the soul descending into matter, which is the cross of matter, and they turned them into a physical, historical event in Judea.
So they took the symbol and made it literal.
They took the stauros, the ancient symbol of the sun's crossing and the soul's stability, and they deliberately conflated it with the Roman execution stake, the crux. They fused a spiritual symbol with a method of torture.
So the aha moment here is that McClellan is technically right that there was no Roman-style crucifixion of Horus.
Right.
But he's completely wrong, because the story of the crucifixion, the betrayed and suffering God, the symbolism of the crossing, the raising up of the pillar of life, is entirely Egyptian.
Precisely. If you are looking for nails and Roman soldiers in the pyramid texts, you are looking for the wrong thing. You are looking for the historicized costume, not the mythic body. The mythic body is the tat, the Ankh, the crossing of the sun at the equinox. That is the true origin of the story of the cross.
So what does this all mean, really? It means we have been taught to read the Gospels like a police report from ancient Judea, when we should have been reading them like a star map or a ritual script from ancient Egypt.
That is the tragedy of historicism. It flattens the multidimensional, universal truth of the myth into a one-dimensional and frankly very questionable history.
Okay, let's get to the timeline, because this is McClellan's big safety net. This is the argument he falls back on. He claims, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is around the 2.29 mark, all these myths you guys are citing, they actually post-date Jesus. He is strongly implying that the Egyptians copied the Christians, not the other way around.
This is where the argument becomes, frankly, absurd. And this is where the ancient model and Martin Bernal just demolish that position. To claim that core Egyptian myths post-date Jesus is to ignore all of chronology. We have the pyramid texts.
Which are from when, again?
They are from the Old Kingdom. We're talking 2400 BC and even earlier. They are the oldest religious texts in the world, and they contain the Iu names, the virgin birth motifs, the resurrection formulas, the entire blueprint.
And we have the testimony of the Greeks themselves, Herodotus again.
Right. Herodotus was writing in the 5th century BC. That's 500 years before Jesus was supposedly born. And he explicitly states that the Greeks took their gods, their mysteries, their festivals, the processions from the Egyptians. So if the Greeks had these rituals 500 years before Jesus, how on earth can they post-date him? The timeline just doesn't work.
Now, McClellan might be referring specifically to certain magical papyri or some later Gnostic texts, which are from the Christian era.
He often relies on that tactic. He'll pick a text from the 3rd century AD that has a Horus story and say, see, this is late. They copied us. But that ignores the genealogy of the ideas in that text, which can be traced back for millennia. But there's one specific piece of evidence that just completely destroys the they copied us argument, the Serapis connection.
Walter Williams goes deep on this. Who or what was Serapis?
Serapis was a synthetic god. He was created, or at least heavily popularized, under the Ptolemies, the Greek rulers of Egypt, starting around 300 BC. The cult of Serapis combined the Egyptian god Osiris Apis, the sacred bull, with Greek anthropomorphism, giving him a human form with a beard like Zeus.
So he was a bridge deity designed to unite the Greek and Egyptian population.
Exactly. And this cult became hugely popular all over the Roman Empire, and there is a letter, a famous letter, from the Roman Emperor Hadrian.
What does it say?
It's preserved in the Augustan history. Hadrian is writing to his brother-in-law Servianus around 134 AD, so this is right when Christianity is forming, and he says, quote, "Those who worship Serapis are likewise Christians. Even those who style themselves the bishops of Christ are devoted to Serapis."
Wait, can you read that again? The bishops of Christ are devoted to Serapis.
Let that sink in. This proves the complete interchangeability of the cults during the formative years of Christianity. It wasn't a case of Egyptians copying Christians. It was that Christianity was emerging directly out of the Serapis and Osiris cults. To the Roman emperor on the ground, they were virtually indistinguishable.
So the iconography we associate with Christianity.
It was often just Serapis iconography. The statues of Isis holding the infant Horus became the statues of Mary holding the infant Jesus. The statues were often just relabeled. So the timeline isn't Jesus lived, then centuries later Egyptians copied him. It's Egyptians had these myths for 3,000 years. They evolved into the cult of Serapis under the Greeks, and then that cult morphed into what we now call Christianity under the Romans.
To say that pyramid texts were written to copy a Jewish sect from the 1st century AD is...
It is a logical fallacy of the highest order. It suggests that the ancient Egyptians were time travelers who went forward in time, watched the life of Jesus, went back 3,000 years, and then carved it all into the pyramids just to confuse scholars in the 21st century. It makes no sense.
Let's touch on the dying and rising God debate. This is another area McClellan dismisses. Around the 10.96 mark, he calls this category outdated scholarship, linking it to Sir James Fraser's The Golden Bough.
Yes, and outdated is often academic code for we don't like where this line of thinking leads anymore. The concept of the dying and rising God is not some literary trope that Fraser invented. It is an observation of nature. This is the entire thesis of Massey's work, the natural genesis.
Nature, the sun, the seasons, the crops.
Right. Early civilized man was a keen observer of his environment. He watched the sun die every single evening and then resurrect every single morning. He watched the sun die at the winter solstice, hang low and weak for 3 days, and then be reborn on December 25th as it began to climb higher in the sky.
And he watched the seed.
He watched the seed, he watched it get buried in the earth, which is death, and then he watched it sprout up as life-giving wheat, resurrection. Osiris is the wheat, isn't he?
Osiris is the grain. There are famous images of stalks of grain sprouting out of the mummified body of Osiris. He's the ultimate dying and rising god. His body is scattered like grain is scattered in the field found by Isis and resurrected in the form of his son Horus, who is the bread of life, the Eucharist. Take, eat, this is my body.
It is the agricultural cycle turned into theology. When Christians eat the wafer, they are participating in a ritual that goes back to the ancient practice of eating the cakes offered to the Queen of Heaven, or eating the bread that was considered the flesh of Osiris. It is the ingestion of the god to sustain your life through the winter, through death.
So when modern scholars like McClellan call Fraser or Massey outdated on this point,
they are often, again, defending that Aryan model. They are trying to sever the link between what they see as civilized Christianity and what they see as primitive nature worship. But Massey's whole point is that you cannot understand the theology without understanding the biology and the astronomy it was based on.
it really feels like we have built a pretty solid case here. The virgin birth is carved in the Luxor stones. The disciples are the spirits of the zodiac and Amenta. The cross is the Egyptian Tat and Ankh. The timeline is secured by Herodotus, the pyramids, and the Emperor Hadrian. So the big question, the one that I keep coming back to is, how did we lose all this? If the evidence is this strong, how did we end up with billions of people believing this is a unique history that happened once in Judea?
That brings us to the synthesis. And to answer that, We need to look at the Gnostics and the work of scholars like David Falk.
The Gnostics, these are the early Christians who were branded as heretics, the knowers.
Yes. Falk's thesis on Egyptian pre-Socratic philosophy helps us build this bridge. The early Gnostics, many of whom were Christians in Egypt, understood these stories as they were originally intended, as allegories for spiritual truth, for gnosis, not as literal history.
So for a Gnostic Christian, the resurrection isn't about a physical grave opening in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. It's about the soul, the divine spark, waking up inside the tomb of the body, here and now.
Exactly. It's an internal psychological spiritual event. But then you have the literalization. As the Roman state began to co-opt and then take over the Christian religion, they needed a tool for social control. And a spiritual allegory is very hard to police. The Christ is within you. That's a radically liberating idea. It makes you your own authority.
But the Christ is a man who lived 2,000 years ago, and we, the bishops, are his sole representatives on earth, and you have to listen to us or you'll be damned. That is a hierarchy. That is a power structure.
That is a power structure. And Walter Williams is very clear about this being a political move. The Council of Nicaea, the violent suppression of the Gnostics, they took the spiritual Christ, which is Horus in spirit, or the Gnostic Christ, and they forced him into the concrete mold of the historic Jesus, flesh and blood.
They created a biography out of a myth.
They did. And then they burned the books that said otherwise. They destroyed the great library at Alexandria, which held these records. They systematically wiped out the Gnostic traditions that preserved the original allegorical meaning.
And the Egyptologist Walter Lubitsch talks about this as a loss of innate knowledge.
He does. He makes a brilliant distinction between innate knowledge, which is direct perception of truth, something the Egyptians cultivated through symbolism and ritual and mental learning, which is just memorizing facts and dogmas. The ancient Egyptian system was about becoming the Christ, about activating the Horus principle within yourself. The historicist view is about worshiping an external man who did it for you. We move from a religion of transformation to a religion of substitution.
So, to bring this all the way back around to Dan McClellan, his YouTube video, we've looked at the triad, Massey's Egyptology, Williams' History of Fabrication, Bernal's Critique of the Academy. We've seen the stones at Luxor, the zodiac of Dendra, the letters of the Emperor Hadrian.
And the verdict, I think, seems clear. McClellan's bad argument video is based on a profound ignorance or dismissal of the massive corpus of Egyptian evidence that Massey laid out. And it's framed by the historiographical manipulation of the West that Bernal exposed. He's refuting a straw man of his own creation while completely ignoring the stone records. He's analyzing the paint chips while missing the entire mural.
So we have deconstructed the myth of the historical unique Jesus and in its place reconstructed the genealogy of the Egyptian Christ. But where does that leave the listener who might be grappling with all this right now?
I want to leave them with a final provocation, a thought that comes directly from Gerald Massey.
Let's hear it.
Massey references that famous line from the Gospel of Matthew, "Out of Egypt have I called my son." In the Bible, it's presented as a prophecy about Jesus, but Massey says it is true in a way you were never ever taught. The son, the Christ principle, the Iu-su, was called out of Egypt. It is an Egyptian child. But here is the challenge for you, the listener. If the story is a myth, does that make it less true?
Or does it make it more true?
Does it make it more universally true? Think about it. If Jesus isn't just a guy who lived and died 2,000 years ago, but is instead an eternal symbol of the divine spark that exists in every human being, born of the virgin matter, betrayed by the darkness within us, crucified on the cross of our own bodies, and destined to be resurrected into the Son of the Spirit, doesn't that mean the story is actually about you?
That's the heavy lifting. The story isn't news from the past. It's a mirror for the present.
It's a mirror. Stay curious.
Oh, deep. Thanks for listening.
Containing an attempt to recover and reconstitute the lost origins of the myths and mysteries, types and symbols, religion and language, with Egypt for the mouthpiece and Africa as the birthplace.